You sent the email, then immediately opened your sent folder to reread it, not to check for typos, to find out if you'd said too much, come across wrong, revealed something you shouldn't have. The email was fine. It was always fine. You did this anyway. That's not anxiety. That's not perfectionism. That's a system running exactly as designed. A system that was installed so early and has been running so quietly for so long that you've stopped noticing it isn't you. Self-doubt is not a character flaw. It's not something broken about how you think. It's a program. Specifically, a learned response pattern that your brain has practiced so many times it now executes automatically, below the level of conscious choice, several times per hour, in the background of almost everything you do. It talks you out of things before you've finished considering them. It edits your sentences before you've finished saying them. It reviews your performance after the moment has passed and finds the exact angle from which it looked worst. It does all of this while sounding distinctly like you. I spent years thinking the voice was mine, that its opinions about my capability were accurate assessments rather than old programs running on outdated data. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand the difference between thinking and conditioning, and to realize that most of what felt like self-knowledge was actually just repetition. This book is not about silencing that voice through willpower or positive thinking. It's about understanding what the voice actually is, and then using your brain's own mechanics to make it irrelevant. The science is real, the techniques are specific, and the change, when it comes, doesn't feel like becoming someone new. It feels like finally hearing yourself without the interference. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1. The voice that never clocks out. The meeting hadn't even started. You were already apologizing inside your head for something you hadn't said yet. Maybe you were rehearsing how to phrase an idea so it wouldn't sound stupid. Maybe you were pre-editing a question you wanted to ask, trimming it down until it felt safe enough to say out loud. Maybe you were just sitting there, watching other people talk, wondering why it felt so much easier for them than it did for you. That's not nervousness. That's not introversion. That's a program running. And it was running before you even walked into the room. Here's what makes self-doubt genuinely strange. It doesn't feel like doubt. It feels like thinking. It feels like being careful, being realistic, being appropriately humble. The voice doesn't say, "I'm going to stop you from living your life today." It says you probably don't have enough experience for that yet, and maybe just wait until you're more prepared and you don't want to say the wrong thing. It sounds like good advice. It sounds suspiciously like you, but it isn't you. That's the first thing worth understanding clearly. A few years back, I watched a colleague spend 40 minutes rewriting a 3-line email. Not because the stakes were high, because she was convinced that however she phrased it, something would be read wrong. She sent it eventually. Nobody noticed anything. She had already moved on to the next email, already rewriting that one in her head. Self-doubt is not a character flaw. It's not weakness. It's not even, technically, a problem with your thinking. It's conditioning, a learned response pattern that your brain has practiced so many times it now runs automatically. Like typing, like driving. You don't decide to doubt yourself. The doubt simply fires, fast and efficient, because that pathway has been reinforced thousands of times. Researchers estimate the average person experiences some form of self-doubt roughly 60 times per day, which works out to once every 90 seconds during waking hours. You don't notice most of them. They've become the background hum of daily life. So constant, so familiar, that they stop registering as anything unusual. They just feel like reality. This is the actual problem. Not that you doubt yourself occasionally, but that you've stopped being able to tell the difference between a thought and a fact. When the voice says you're not qualified enough, that feels like an observation. When it says they'll judge you, that feels like a prediction based on evidence. When it says you'll probably mess this up, that feels like a reasonable risk assessment. None of these are facts. All of them feel like facts, and your behavior follows accordingly. The brain is not trying to hurt you. This is important to understand, because the moment you start treating your own mind like an enemy, you've already lost. The brain is running a protection protocol. Somewhere along the way, early probably, it learned that putting yourself forward carried risk. That visibility led to criticism. That trying and failing was more painful than not trying at all. So it built a system. And the system works exactly as designed. It just hasn't updated its threat model since approximately the 5th grade. Here's the neurological reality. Every time you doubt yourself, a specific pattern of neurons fires in your brain. And every time that pattern fires, it gets slightly stronger, more efficient, faster. Neuroscientists describe it simply: neurons that fire together, wire together. Repeat something often enough, and the brain stops treating it as a choice. It becomes a default. Self-doubt became your default. Not because you're broken, because you practiced it, mostly without knowing you were practicing anything at all. This is actually the most useful thing you can understand about what's happening. Because it means the voice that says you're not good enough isn't the voice of truth. It's the voice of repetition. It got loud because it got used. And what gets used can, with the right approach, be replaced. The key word there is replaced, not silenced, not defeated, not argued into submission. The goal is not to go to war with part of your own mind. That war has no winner. The goal is to build something better, a different set of pathways that your brain eventually finds more efficient to use than the old ones. Neural competition. When new pathways become stronger, older ones weaken. You don't have to destroy the doubt highway. You build a better road, and traffic naturally shifts. But before any rewiring can happen, something more basic has to occur. You have to be able to see the program for what it is, not feel it, absorb it, live inside it, but actually notice it. Observe it, name it. The moment you can say, "There's the doubt pattern firing again," instead of "This is the truth about me," something shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once. But the gap between stimulus and response opens, just slightly. And in that gap is where everything else becomes possible. You are not your doubt. You never were. The voice that tells you otherwise has been practicing for a very long time. It's time to start practicing something else. Chapter 2. The brain that built the cage. Your brain is not trying to destroy you. It's trying to be helpful. Unfortunately, it's been taking notes in the wrong class for 30 years. Picture a trail through a forest. The first time someone walks it, they're pushing through overgrowth, stepping around roots, moving slowly. The second time, slightly easier. The 10th time, there's a visible path. The 100th time, it's worn smooth. After years of use, it's a road. After decades, it's a highway. Wide, fast, frictionless. That's what happened with your self-doubt. Not an accident. Not a personality defect. Just a trail that got walked so many times, it became infrastructure. And here's the part that nobody tells you. Your brain didn't build that highway because something was wrong with you. It built it because it was efficient. because the doubt pattern fired and you survived, and the brain logged that as a successful outcome. Avoid exposure, avoid criticism, avoid risk. Outcome: still alive, still functioning. The brain filed that under things that work and kept repeating it. The brain loves repetition. It mistakes familiarity for truth. This is not a flaw in the design. It's how skills develop, how language gets learned, how a surgeon's hands eventually know what to do without conscious instruction. The same mechanism that makes expertise possible also makes limiting beliefs feel like reality. Same hardware, different software. I spent the better part of a year convinced I wasn't a real writer. I had evidence. Rejections, mostly. A few pieces I'd published that nobody seemed to notice. I was thorough about collecting that evidence, much less thorough about noticing the counter-evidence sitting right next to it. Neuroscience spent most of the 20th century operating on a comfortable assumption that the adult brain was essentially fixed. Personality set. Pathways permanent. The architecture of who you were, locked in place after childhood. This assumption shaped therapy, education, medicine. It also gave a lot of people a convenient reason to stop trying. Then came neuroplasticity, the discovery that the brain rewires itself continuously, throughout adulthood, throughout life, in direct response to thought, experience, and behavior. New connections form, old ones fade. The structure of your brain is not a fixed map. It's a living document, constantly being revised. What this means for self-doubt is specific and significant. The neural pathways that create your limiting beliefs are not permanent structures. They are patterns of electrical activity. Strong patterns, yes. Well-established, fast, efficient. But patterns nonetheless. And patterns can change. The mechanism is called synaptic pruning, combined with long-term potentiation. In plain language, pathways you use frequently get stronger and faster. Pathways you stop using get weaker and eventually fade. Your brain is constantly making decisions about what to keep sharp and what to let go, based almost entirely on what you actually do with it. This means something uncomfortable. Every time you've avoided a challenge because of self-doubt, you reinforced the doubt pathway. Every time you talked yourself out of speaking up, the voice that talked you out of it got slightly louder. Every time you delayed, deflected, or preemptively retreated, you were not being careful. You were practicing. You were making the cage stronger. Nobody did this to you maliciously. You didn't do it to yourself on purpose, but it happened. An understanding that it happened through a mechanical process, not through some deep truth about your character, is the beginning of being able to change it. Here's what makes neuroplasticity genuinely useful, rather than just interesting. The same mechanism works in reverse. When you consistently think thoughts of capability, when you take action despite uncertainty, when you respond to doubt with redirection instead of retreat, you are building new pathways. Slowly at first, awkwardly, with effort. But the brain responds. Brain imaging studies have shown measurable structural changes in neural architecture within weeks of consistent behavior change. Not months, not years, weeks. The brain is far more responsive than it was once believed to be. It is waiting, in a sense, to be given new instructions. It just needs those instructions delivered consistently enough to take them seriously. There's a study worth knowing about. Participants who spent an hour a day for 5 days simply imagining playing piano, not touching an instrument, just mentally rehearsing, showed nearly the same neural development in the relevant brain regions as participants who actually played. The brain processed the imagined experience as functionally real. New pathways formed around something that never physically happened. This is not a loophole in the system. This is how the system works. Your brain does not have a reliable method for distinguishing between a vividly imagined experience and a real one, which means mental rehearsal is not just preparation, it is practice. It is literally building the neural architecture of confidence before you ever need to use it. The implications here are significant. You don't have to wait for circumstances to improve before beginning to rewire. You don't need to accumulate enough real-world successes to justify feeling capable. You can begin the construction now, in your mind, in your body, in the small choices you make each day about which voice you follow. The cage your brain built is made of the same material as any other neural pathway. Electrical patterns, repeated associations, practiced responses. It was built through use. It will be dismantled the same way, not by attacking it directly, but by building something more useful right next to it. The brain is not your enemy. It's an extraordinarily efficient construction crew that builds whatever you keep asking it to build. The question worth sitting with is simple. What have you been asking it to build? You're still here. 2 chapters in, that's not nothing. Most people who clicked this video moved on before they got uncomfortable. You didn't. Which means something in here is hitting close enough to stay. If that's the case, subscribe. Not because this channel needs it, because the next time you want this kind of thinking, you'll want to find it without looking for it. That's all. Back to the part that actually matters. Chapter 3, the 2-minute override. The technique doesn't feel powerful the first time. It feels awkward. That's actually a good sign. Awkward means unfamiliar. Unfamiliar means new. And new is exactly what you're going for. Most confidence advice operates on a simple premise. Feel better first, then act. Build yourself up, get your mindset right, eliminate the doubt, and then go do the thing. It's intuitive. It's also almost completely backwards. Waiting to feel confident before acting confidently is like waiting to be fit before going to the gym. The feeling follows the action, not the other way around. What you're about to learn is a specific 4-step protocol designed to interrupt the self-doubt pattern at the neurological level and redirect your brain toward a more useful response. The whole process takes under 2 minutes. The results, with consistent use, are not temporary. You are building new pathways each time you use it. The more you use it, the less you need it. That's the goal. It's called the Neural Override Protocol. Here's exactly how it works. Step 1. Interrupt without fighting. The moment you notice self-doubt arising, the hesitation, the internal rehearsal of failure, the quiet voice explaining why this probably won't work, you're going to do something that sounds strange. You're going to thank your brain, out loud if possible, in your head if not. Something simple. Thank you, brain. I've got this handled. That's it. No argument, no rebuttal, no attempt to convince yourself the doubt is wrong. Here's why this matters. When you fight self-doubt, when you push back against it, try to override it through willpower. Tell yourself to stop being ridiculous. Your brain interprets the resistance as confirmation that there's something worth worrying about. It doubles down. The doubt gets louder because your own reaction told it the threat was real. Gratitude short-circuits that loop. You're not agreeing with the doubt. You're acknowledging it without amplifying it. You're telling your nervous system, message received, I'm choosing consciously from here. The brain relaxes its grip slightly, and that slight loosening is all you need. I was about to give a talk to a room of about 200 people. Backstage, the doubt was running its full repertoire. Who do you think you are? You're going to lose the thread. They'll see right through you. I stood there and said, out loud, quietly, "Thanks for trying to help." The woman doing my microphone gave me a look. I didn't explain. It worked anyway. Step 2. Redirect with one question. Immediately after thanking your brain, ask yourself one specific question. What would the most confident version of me do right now? This question is neurologically precise. It activates the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for higher-order thinking and decision-making, while simultaneously pulling your brain away from threat detection mode. It also does something subtle and important. It gives your brain a search task. Your brain is a pattern-matching machine. When you ask it a question, it looks for answers. Ask what's going to go wrong, and it will find everything that could go wrong. Ask what would the most confident version of me do, and it will begin accessing memories of competence, capability, moments when you handled something well. This is not positive thinking. This is redirecting the search function. You're not telling your brain to ignore reality. You're telling it to look in a different direction, and it will find real things there. Evidence of your capability that the doubt pattern has been systematically ignoring. You don't have to answer the question perfectly. You don't have to have a complete vision of your most confident self. Just asking it begins the neurological shift. The brain starts moving in a different direction. Step 3. Change the body. Here's something the brain as computer metaphor gets wrong. Your brain is not separate from your body. It is in constant two-way communication with every system in your body. Which means your physical state doesn't just reflect your mental state, it actively shapes it. When you're in self-doubt, your body shows it. Shoulders forward, chest slightly collapsed, breathing shallow, eyes down. This posture sends a signal to your brain. Threat detected, protect yourself. And your brain responds by generating more threat detection, more doubt, more hesitation. The loop closes. You can break this loop from the body end. Stand or sit tall. Shoulders back and down, spine long, chin level. Take 3 slow breaths. Exhale longer than inhale. Add a slight, genuine lift at the corners of your mouth. Not a performance smile. Just enough to shift the facial muscle feedback your brain is receiving. Hold this for 30 seconds minimum while continuing to ask your redirect question. Research on postural feedback shows that confident posture measurably increases testosterone and decreases cortisol within minutes. These are not metaphorical changes. They are neurochemical. You are physically creating the internal environment of confidence through body position alone. Your brain receives different data and begins generating different outputs. Step 4. Rehearse the win. While you're holding the confident physical state, spend 60 seconds running a mental movie. See yourself handling the current situation well, not perfectly. Confidence isn't perfection, just capably, calmly. You doing the thing, and it working out. Make it specific. Make it sensory. Hear what you'd hear. Feel what you'd feel. The more vivid the rehearsal, the stronger the neural pathway you're building. Remember, your brain processes vividly imagined experiences almost identically to real ones. You are creating evidence of success before it happens. You are preloading the pathway. The full protocol, thank, redirect, embody, rehearse, runs in under 2 minutes. But don't mistake the brevity for lightness. Each repetition strengthens the confidence pathway and weakens the doubt pathway. Each use is a vote for a different default. The first time, it will feel mechanical. The 10th time, it will feel like a tool. The 50th time, it will feel like instinct. The 2-minute override is not a trick. It's construction work. You are, every single time you use it, building the neural architecture of a person for whom confidence is the automatic response. 2 minutes. Every time the doubt fires. That's the whole job. Chapter 4. The Approval Machine. You've been checking your phone after posting something. Don't pretend that's about staying connected. You know the feeling. You post something, a thought, a photo, a piece of work you actually care about, and then you put the phone down. For about 40 seconds. Then you pick it up again. Not because you expect anything yet, just to check, just in case. And when the notification arrives, there's a small but undeniable hit of something that feels like relief, like confirmation, like, briefly, specifically, you're okay. That's not a social media habit. That's a nervous system running a very old program. The need for external validation didn't start with smartphones. It started much earlier, in classrooms and dinner tables and playgrounds, in moments when you learned, without anyone explicitly saying so, that your worth was not a fixed thing. It moved. It responded to performance. You were more valuable when you did well, less valuable when you didn't. More acceptable when you behaved correctly, less acceptable when you didn't. Love, attention, approval, these things arrived conditionally, and your developing brain took meticulous notes. The conclusion it reached was logical, given the evidence. I need to manage how I appear to others, because how I appear determines how much I'm worth. That conclusion is now running your life. Quietly, efficiently, without your permission. There was a period in my late 20s when I made almost every significant decision based on what I thought the people around me would think of it. Not what they actually thought, I rarely asked. What I imagined they'd think. I was, in effect, outsourcing my choices to a committee that didn't exist and had never been consulted. Here's what external validation actually is, neurologically. When you receive approval, a compliment, a like, a positive response, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in every other reward-based behavior. Food, sex, gambling. The release feels good. Your brain logs it as something worth repeating, and then it starts organizing your behavior around getting more of it. This is not a character weakness. It's a hijacked reward system. The brain learned to associate other people's approval with safety, with belonging, with worth. And now it treats the absence of approval the same way it treats any other threat, with anxiety, with vigilance, with an urgent need to do something about it. The result is a particular kind of exhaustion that's hard to name because it never stops. You're always, at some level, monitoring, tracking reactions, reading rooms, adjusting your behavior based on signals you may have imagined, editing what you say before you say it, and editing what you said after you've said it. Performing constantly for an audience whose approval you need, but can never fully secure. Because here's the structural problem with depending on external validation. People are inconsistent, they're distracted, they're dealing with their own internal weather. The same person who praised you last week is quiet this week, not because anything changed about you, but because they're tired or preoccupied or simply didn't notice. Your nervous system doesn't know that. It registers the silence as data, and the data says, something is wrong. This is what makes external validation so corrosive. It's not just unreliable, it's unpredictable. And unpredictable reinforcement is the most addictive kind. Slot machines pay out on random schedules. So do the people you're seeking approval from. Your brain responds to both the same way, with compulsive checking, with heightened anxiety between rewards, with an inability to simply stop. The validation trap also does something subtler and more damaging. It gradually replaces your internal compass with an external one. Instead of asking, "What do I actually think about this?" you ask, "How will this be received?" Instead of "What do I want?" you ask, "What's expected of me?" Your own preferences, instincts, and judgments get quieter and quieter, not because they disappear, but because you've stopped consulting them. You've outsourced the decision-making to people who don't know you as well as you know yourself, and don't have to live with the results. Breaking the approval loop requires something that sounds simple and is genuinely difficult. You have to learn to generate the thing internally that you've been seeking externally, not through affirmations, not by telling yourself you're great until you believe it, but through a practice of consistent, honest self-acknowledgement, noticing your own effort, recognizing your own growth, marking your own progress, not because someone else validated it, but because you were there and you saw it happen. Start small. Today, at the end of the day, name one thing you did that required effort or courage, not for anyone else's consumption, just for yours. Write it down if that helps. Say it out loud if that's easier. The point is simply this: you witnessed yourself. You marked the moment. You didn't wait for someone else to confirm it was real. This is not a comfortable practice at first. If you've spent years depending on external feedback, generating your own feels unfamiliar, possibly arrogant, possibly pointless, because who cares what you think of yourself? But that reaction is the validation trap speaking. That instinct to dismiss your own perception of your own life is exactly what you're trying to unlearn. There is also the question of what you do with other people's opinions once you've stopped depending on them for your sense of self. This is where people often overcorrect. Breaking the approval addiction doesn't mean becoming indifferent to feedback. It means becoming a better judge of which feedback is worth using. Constructive criticism from someone who understands your work and wants you to improve, that's useful data. A stranger's dismissive comment, a colleague's irritable tone on a bad day, a silence that you've interpreted as rejection without evidence, that's noise. You don't have to treat them the same. When your self-worth is stable internally, you can receive external feedback without being destabilized by it. You can hear criticism without collapsing. You can receive praise without needing it. You become, in the most practical sense, less emotionally expensive to be around, because you've stopped quietly demanding that everyone around you manage your sense of value. That shift is noticeable. People feel it. They relax. They stop choosing their words so carefully around you. They start being more honest, more direct, more genuinely present. Relationships get easier because you're no longer running the approval algorithm in the background of every interaction. The approval machine was installed early. It ran for a long time. Turning it off is not a single moment. It's a gradual withdrawal from the compulsive checking, the performance, the endless calibration of how you're being perceived. But every time you catch yourself seeking a reaction and choose to generate your own instead, the machine loses a little power. Eventually, you stop needing the hit, and then something genuinely surprising happens. You stop performing, and people like you more. Chapter 5. The Critic with No Credentials. It catastrophizes. It compares. It predicts. It has never once been right about your future, and yet you keep renewing its contract. Your inner critic has a remarkable track record of failure as a forecasting tool. Every time it told you that you'd embarrass yourself, that people would see through you, that the thing you were attempting would end in visible, humiliating disaster, it was wrong. You survived. Often you did better than fine. And yet the next time a challenge appeared, the critic was back at the podium, delivering the same speech with the same certainty, and you listened again. This is worth sitting with. Not because it makes you foolish, but because it reveals something important about what the critic actually is. It's not an advisor. It's not a protective mechanism operating in your best interest. It's a pattern that learned to speak in first person, borrowed your voice, and has been squatting in your head ever since, collecting rent in the form of your attention and your hesitation. Understanding where it came from doesn't eliminate it, but it changes the relationship. And changing the relationship is the whole point. The inner critic develops early. Most psychologists trace its origins to the first years of life, when external criticism gets internalized as a coping strategy. The logic at the time was sound. If I criticize myself first, I might avoid the pain of being criticized by someone else. If I point out my own flaws before anyone else does, maybe I maintain some control over the story. If I predict my own failure, the disappointment won't catch me off guard. This is a child's solution to a child's problem. It served a purpose when you were small and dependent and genuinely powerless to change your circumstances. When the adults around you held all the authority and criticism could feel like a withdrawal of love. The inner critic was, in its way, trying to protect you. But you're not small anymore. You're not dependent. And the critic never got the memo. I had a period in my life where I would finish a piece of work, something I genuinely struggled with and felt okay about. And within about 30 seconds, the critic would start its audit. Every flaw, every weak section, every place where someone smarter, more experienced, more talented would have done it differently. By the time it was done, I couldn't remember what I'd actually made. I could only see what was wrong with it. The critic operates through 5 distinct strategies. Recognizing them by name is the first step toward not being controlled by them. Catastrophizing takes any small error and extrapolates it to maximum consequence. You send an email with a typo, and the critic begins constructing a scenario in which this single moment defines how your colleagues see you professionally, permanently. The jump from "I made a mistake" to this is evidence of fundamental inadequacy happens so fast, it feels like reasoning. It isn't. It's a reflex wearing the costume of logic, comparing measures you exclusively against other people's highlights. It selects the most accomplished person in any given room, identifies the area where they outperform you most dramatically, and presents that gap as a summary of your worth. It never compares your strengths to their struggles. It never accounts for different starting points, different circumstances, different definitions of success. The comparison is always rigged, and the critic knows it. Perfectionism sets standards that function less as goals and more as guaranteed failure. Because perfection is not a real destination, it's a moving horizon. You reach one standard and the critic raises the bar, not in celebration of your progress, but to ensure the goalpost is always just far enough away to confirm you haven't arrived. Perfectionism isn't high standards. It's a trap with high standards painted on the outside. Mind reading fills in other people's reactions with negative content. Someone doesn't reply to your message promptly, and the critic has already written their internal monologue, annoyed, dismissive, reconsidering their opinion of you. Someone looks distracted during your presentation, and the critic has already concluded they find you boring. These interpretations feel like social intelligence. They are anxiety in disguise. Fortune-telling predicts failure with a confidence it has never earned. It tells you how the conversation will go before you've had it, how the pitch will land before you've made it, how the relationship will end before it's begun. And because the predictions feel authoritative, you sometimes don't even try. which means the critic never has to be proven wrong. These strategies are not random. They work together to create a closed system. The critic predicts failure, so you avoid the attempt. So there's no evidence of success. So the prediction feels validated. So the critic predicts failure again with even more conviction. The loop sustains itself. Breaking the loop requires a specific technique from cognitive behavioral therapy called cognitive diffusion. The goal is not to argue with the critic. Arguing with the critic is like trying to win a debate against a heckler. The engagement itself gives them power. The goal is to change your relationship to the criticism, to see the thoughts as mental events rather than factual reports. The process is simple. When you notice the critic starting its commentary, you say, internally or aloud, 4 words. There's my inner critic. That's it. No rebuttal. No analysis. No attempt to shut it down or prove it wrong. Just naming it. This act of naming creates what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thinking rather than being absorbed by it. When you can see a thought as a thought rather than experiencing it as reality, its grip loosens. You create distance, and in that distance, choice becomes possible. The naming works because it activates a different part of the brain. The moment you shift from I'm going to fail to there's my inner critic telling me I'm going to fail, you move from the emotional reactive brain to the observational analytical brain. You step briefly but meaningfully outside the pattern. And from outside the pattern, you can choose not to follow it. After naming the critic, there's a second move. Ask yourself one question. What would I say to a good friend in this situation? This question matters because most people maintain a profound double standard between how they speak to themselves and how they speak to people they care about. If a friend told you they were terrified of failing at something important to them, you would not say you're probably right. You're not good enough for this. You would offer perspective, encouragement, honest but kind assessment. You would tell them what you actually believe, that they're capable, that struggle doesn't mean inadequacy, that trying is worth something regardless of outcome. You deserve the same response, not because it's more comfortable, but because it's more accurate. The goal is not to silence the critic permanently. That's neither realistic nor, frankly, necessary. Some self-evaluation is useful. The capacity to notice your own mistakes, to identify where you could do better, to maintain standards. These are valuable. The critic, stripped of its catastrophizing and its malice, contains some genuine information buried in the noise. The goal is to reduce its volume, to slow its frequency, to stop letting it have the final word on what you attempt, what you believe about yourself, and what you decide you're capable of. Over time, as you consistently name the critic and activate your own compassionate voice in response, something measurable happens. The neural pathways supporting self-criticism weaken from disuse. The pathways supporting honest, kind self-assessment strengthen from practice. The critic doesn't disappear. It just gets quieter, and you get better at not listening. Chapter 6. The 5 ways people fail at this. The mistake most people make is practicing confidence when they don't need it. Like rehearsing CPR on someone who's perfectly fine. You feel good one morning, rested, clear-headed, the doubt unusually quiet. So you do the visualization. You stand tall, you run the mental rehearsal, you ask the redirect question. It goes smoothly. You feel better. You conclude that the technique works. Then 3 days later, you're standing outside a room where something important is about to happen, and the doubt is loud, and your hands are slightly wrong, and the technique feels fake and forced, and you can't quite access the confident version of yourself because the confident version of yourself feels very far away right now. So you don't use it. You push through on adrenaline and willpower, and it's fine, but it's not the same. And you tell yourself you'll practice more when things calm down. Things don't calm down. The moments when you most need the technique are the moments that feel least like good conditions for using it. That's not a problem with the technique. That's the entire point. Mistake 1. Practicing only when you're already comfortable. Neural rewiring happens most powerfully under conditions of actual challenge. When the doubt is present, when the stakes feel real, when your nervous system is activated, that is precisely when the new pathways need to be laid down. Because those are the conditions under which you'll eventually need to access them. Think about physical training. You don't build cardiovascular capacity by walking on flat ground at a comfortable pace. You build it by working at the edge of your current ability, under conditions of real exertion. Confidence works identically. The awkward, uncomfortable, slightly forced feeling of using the technique while you're genuinely doubting yourself is not a sign that it isn't working. It's the sensation of new pathways forming. The people who see lasting results are the ones who use the protocol specifically when they least feel like it. Not when they're already calm, when they're not. When it feels mechanical and artificial and slightly ridiculous. That friction is the work. Mistake 2. Trying to eliminate doubt entirely. This sounds like exactly the right goal. It is, in fact, a trap. When you declare war on self-doubt, when you decide the objective is to never feel uncertain, never hesitate, never experience that quiet internal resistance, you create something worse than doubt. You create internal conflict. Your brain interprets the aggressive rejection of doubt as confirmation that something genuinely threatening is present. It responds by generating more doubt, not less. You end up fighting harder against something that gets stronger the harder you fight it. Doubt is not the enemy. Unquestioned doubt is the enemy. There is a difference between a feeling that passes through and a feeling that drives. Between noticing uncertainty and being ruled by it. The goal is not to feel nothing. The goal is to feel the doubt, acknowledge it briefly, and then make your decision from your values rather than your fear. Some doubt is actually useful information. It can signal genuine risk worth considering, preparation worth doing, information worth gathering. The problem isn't doubt's existence. It's the habit of treating every doubtful thought as an instruction. When you stop trying to eliminate doubt and start trying to change your relationship with it, the whole thing gets easier. You're no longer at war with part of your own mind. You're simply choosing, moment by moment, which voice gets to drive. I used to think that if I still felt nervous before something important, it meant I hadn't done enough inner work. That real confidence would feel like calm certainty. It took an embarrassingly long time to understand that the nervousness wasn't a problem. It was just energy. The question was always what I did with it. Mistake 3. Expecting linear progress. Confidence development does not move in a straight line from less to more. It moves in a spiral. You make progress. You feel it. Then something happens. A rejection, a bad day, a high-stakes moment where the old patterns resurge with surprising intensity. And it feels like you've lost everything you built. You haven't. This is important to understand clearly, because the moment people interpret normal regression as failure, they quit. And quitting during a temporary resurgence of old patterns is the most expensive mistake in this entire process. Here's what's actually happening. Your brain has redundant systems. multiple pathways for the same response. When you weaken the primary self-doubt pathway through consistent practice, your brain sometimes activates secondary pathways, older, deeper, less used routes to the same familiar destination. This can feel like sudden collapse. It's actually your brain's last serious attempt to maintain a familiar pattern before that pattern loses its grip. These resurgences tend to happen right before significant breakthroughs. The doubt gets loud precisely when something important is close, when the new pattern is almost strong enough to become the default. Think of it less as regression and more as turbulence before landing. When old patterns resurface, the response is not to panic or conclude you're back at square one. The response is to use the protocol. Again. That's all. One more repetition of the new pathway. One more vote for the person you're becoming. Mistake 4. Going through the motions without emotion. Your brain responds to emotional intensity, not just repetition. A thought practiced without genuine feeling creates a weak neural pathway. A thought practiced with real emotional engagement creates a strong one. This is why traumatic experiences can rewire the brain instantly. The emotional charge makes the neural imprint immediate and deep. You can use this principle deliberately. When you run the confidence visualization, the question is not just whether you're imagining the right scenes. It's whether you can generate genuine feeling while you do it. Pride, capability, the specific satisfaction of having handled something well. If you practice confident posture while feeling nothing in particular, you're building a weak pathway. If you practice confident posture while genuinely connecting to a memory of real competence, you're building something that will hold under pressure. This requires more than going through the steps. It requires actually showing up for the practice, bringing your full attention to it rather than running through it mechanically while thinking about something else. The difference in outcome between engaged practice and mechanical practice is not small. Mistake 5. Practicing without real-world application. Mental rehearsal is real practice. Visualization builds actual neural pathways. This is not metaphor. But there is a category of learning that only happens through direct experience, and no amount of internal rehearsal fully substitutes for it. Your brain learns through doing. It needs the real social interaction, not just the imagined one. The actual meeting where you speak up, not just the mental rehearsal of speaking up. The genuine conversation with a stranger, not just the visualization of one. Real experience provides something imagination cannot. The specific, textured, embodied knowledge that I actually did this and it worked. That knowledge accumulates. Each real-world application adds to a growing body of evidence that your confident responses are functional, not just theoretically sound, but practically reliable. This evidence is different in kind from anything you can generate in your own mind. It's external, verifiable, something the doubt patterns cannot easily dismiss. Start with low-stakes situations. Speak up once in a meeting where the consequences of the comment are minimal. Start one conversation with someone you don't know well. Share one piece of work you've been sitting on. Each of these small applications is more valuable than it appears. Not for the external result, but for the internal proof. The confident version of you is not built in contemplation alone. It's built in the moments you actually show up, feeling uncertain, and do the thing anyway. Those moments are the whole point of everything else. Chapter 7. The Spiral. You're waiting to feel ready. Readiness is not coming. It was never scheduled. There is a particular kind of paralysis that masquerades as preparation. You're not avoiding the thing. You're getting ready for the thing. You're building skills, gathering information, waiting for the right moment, making sure you're sufficiently equipped before you begin. This feels responsible. It feels like due diligence. It is, in most cases, a more sophisticated version of hiding. The readiness myth is one of self-doubt's most elegant constructions. Because it doesn't tell you no, it tells you not yet. And not yet is almost impossible to argue with. Not yet sounds reasonable. Not yet sounds like wisdom. Not yet can last a lifetime if you let it. The people who built confidence that actually holds did not wait until they felt ready. They started while feeling unready, took small enough steps that success was highly probable, and then did something most people skip entirely. They stopped and acknowledged that they had done it. That last part is not optional. It's the mechanism. Here's how the confidence spiral actually works. You take a small action that requires you to override self-doubt. Not a massive leap, not a dramatic gesture, but something that costs you something. A comment you might normally swallow. A question you might normally decide was too basic to ask. An introduction you might normally talk yourself out of making. The action is small. The override is real. Then something happens that either goes well or goes adequately. Not perfectly. Adequately is sufficient. And in that moment, before you move on to the next thing, you pause. You say to yourself, clearly and specifically, I did that. Not that wasn't so bad. Not okay next. Not a mental shrug and immediate redirect to what's coming. You mark it. You let it register. You treat it as the evidence it actually is. Your brain pays attention to what you pay attention to. When you mark a confident action as significant, when you genuinely acknowledge it rather than rushing past it, you're telling your brain that this pattern of behavior is important, worth reinforcing, worth making easier next time. The brain responds accordingly. The pathway gets slightly stronger. The next similar action feels slightly less costly. This is the spiral. Not a metaphor. A literal neurological feedback loop in which small wins build the architecture for larger ones. The reason most people don't build confidence this way is that the small wins don't feel impressive. Speaking up once in a meeting doesn't feel like progress toward becoming someone who presents to senior leadership. Starting a conversation with a stranger at an event doesn't feel like building social confidence. Writing one paragraph of something you've been avoiding doesn't feel like momentum toward finishing it. But this thinking has the scale wrong. The question is not whether the action was impressive by external standards. The question is whether it required you to override self-doubt to do it. If it did, it counts. Fully. Regardless of how it looks from the outside, the confidence spiral compounds. This is not motivational language. It's how the mathematics of habit formation works. Each successful override makes the next override slightly easier. Each acknowledgement of a small win builds slightly more neural infrastructure. Over months, the baseline shifts. Actions that once required real courage become routine. And the edge of your comfort zone has moved outward, quietly, without drama, simply because you kept walking toward it in small increments. There's a period I remember clearly where I committed to one small, confident action per day. Nothing heroic. One email I'd been avoiding sending. One opinion shared in a conversation where I'd normally stay neutral. One ask I'd been rehearsing but not making. At the end of each day, I wrote down what I'd done. Just one line. Within about 3 weeks, the list was undeniable. Not because each individual entry was remarkable, but because there were 21 of them, and 3 weeks earlier there had been 0. There is an identity dimension to the spiral that matters as much as the behavioral one. Possibly more. Behavior follows identity. This is one of the most robust findings in behavioral psychology. What you do consistently is downstream of who you believe yourself to be. When you believe you are someone who doubts themselves, hesitates, holds back. You generate behavior consistent with that belief. The doubt feels like self-knowledge rather than pattern. But identity is not fixed. It's a running narrative, constantly updated by evidence. And small, confident actions are evidence. Each one, marked and acknowledged, is a small data point that says, I am someone who does this. Repeated enough times, the narrative shifts. Not because you decided to have a new identity, but because you accumulated enough evidence to support one. This is why the acknowledgement step in the spiral is not optional. Not just neurologically, but narratively. When you mark a confident action, you're not just reinforcing a pathway. You're updating your story about who you are. And updated stories produce updated behavior. The spiral accelerates. The practical structure of building confidence spirals deliberately is straightforward. First, identify what your current edge actually is, not where you wish it were, where it actually is right now. The level of challenge where you feel genuine resistance but not overwhelming threat. That's your starting point. Not where the voice tells you you'll never get to, where you actually are. Second, choose actions at that edge, consistently, not occasionally. The spiral requires inputs, small, regular, genuine inputs, 1 per day if possible, several per week at minimum. The frequency matters because confidence, like physical fitness, degrades without use. You can't practice once a week and expect the same results as practicing daily. Third, mark every win, every single one. Not in your head, where it will be immediately buried under the next thing, in writing or out loud or to someone else, but externally, where it has to be real rather than just a passing thought. The marking is not celebration for its own sake, it's evidence collection. You are building a case against the version of self-doubt that tells you nothing is working. Fourth, let the spiral set the pace. Don't force it. The moment you jump from your current edge to something 3 levels beyond it, because you're impatient with your own progress, you're not building confidence. You're testing it. And premature testing, before the foundation is solid, produces failures that the doubt pattern is very quick to catalog and use against you. Gradual and consistent beats, dramatic and sporadic. Every time. The brain responds to steady repetition more reliably than to occasional intensity. There is also something worth saying about how the spiral handles setbacks, because they will happen. You will attempt something at your edge and it won't go well. You'll speak up and be dismissed. You'll put something out and it won't land. You'll take a risk and it won't pay off. The spiral doesn't break on setbacks. It only breaks if you let the setback become the final data point, rather than one data point among many. If your confidence log has 23 entries and one of them is a failure, you have 22 wins and 1 loss. The doubt pattern will try to make the loss the headline. Your job is to keep the full record visible. One bad outcome doesn't undo the architecture you've built. It adds 1 brick to the doubt side of the ledger. You add 2 more to the confidence side and keep going. The spiral doesn't require perfection. It requires continuation. Keep going. Mark the wins. Let the math do what math does. The momentum you're looking for is not ahead of you, waiting until conditions improve. It's behind you, in every small action you've already taken that you forgot to count. Start counting. Chapter 8. The Social Animal in Over Its Head. Your nervous system thinks a bad first impression at a networking event is roughly equivalent to being expelled from the tribe and left to die. It is wrong, but it doesn't know that. This is not hyperbole. The threat detection system in your brain was built for a social environment where rejection had genuine survival consequences. You lived in a small group. Everyone knew everyone. If the group turned against you, there was nowhere else to go. No other tribe to join, no city to disappear into, no fresh start available. Social rejection in that environment was a legitimate existential threat. That environment no longer exists, but the hardware does. So when you walk into a room full of people you don't know, your nervous system runs the same threat assessment it would have run 40,000 years ago. Who are these people? Are they safe? Do they accept me? Am I in danger? And the moment any signal arrives that could be interpreted as negative, a glance that lingers slightly too long, a pause in conversation that feels slightly too heavy, a response that was warmer to someone else than to you, the alarm fires. Not quietly. Loudly, physically, immediately. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing goes shallow. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for fluid thinking, quick recall, and social intelligence, goes partially offline. And then you're standing in a conversation, nervous system activated, best thinking unavailable, trying to seem natural. This is not a personal failing. It's an evolutionary mismatch. Your ancient brain in a modern situation, running outdated software with genuine conviction. Understanding the mechanism doesn't automatically fix it, but it does change what you're trying to do. You're not trying to become someone who feels no social anxiety. That's not a realistic goal for most people, and it's not necessary. You're trying to become someone whose nervous system settles quickly in social situations. Someone who can feel the activation and keep functioning anyway. Someone who has enough reliable tools that the anxiety doesn't run the interaction. The first tool is physiological preparation. Before entering a social situation that you know triggers anxiety, you're going to regulate your nervous system deliberately rather than hoping it manages itself. 5 slow breaths. Exhale longer than inhale. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the counterpart to the fight-or-flight response. It physically tells your body that no threat is present. Your heart rate slows. Your muscles release some tension. Your prefrontal cortex comes back online, at least partially. Confident posture. Shoulders back, spine long, head level. Not performance, alignment. The physical signal of someone who belongs in the room. Your brain reads your own body language the same way other people do. When you stand like someone who's comfortable, your brain gets a small but real message. We're okay here. A slight, genuine smile. Not a performance of happiness. Just the facial position associated with ease. Your brain monitors your facial muscle feedback continuously. A relaxed face sends a relaxed signal. Do this before you walk in the hallway, in the car, in the elevator. Not after the anxiety has already peaked. Before. I went through a period of genuine social dread in my early 30s. Not shyness exactly. I could function. But every social event had this particular quality of mild, ongoing suffering. I was always slightly behind the conversation, slightly aware of my own performance, slightly exhausted by it all. What changed wasn't that I became more extroverted. It was that I stopped trying to be interesting and started being curious instead. The relief was almost physical. This brings us to the most practical shift available in social confidence. The move from performance to curiosity. Performance mode is exhausting because it never ends. When your goal in a conversation is to seem interesting, intelligent, impressive, the conversation becomes a continuous test. Every sentence is evaluated before it leaves your mouth. Every response is monitored for impact. Your attention is split between the actual interaction and your internal commentary on how the interaction is going. You are, effectively, in 2 places at once. Neither of them fully present. Curiosity mode operates entirely differently. When your goal is to genuinely understand the other person, what they think, what they've experienced, what they care about, your attention goes outward. You stop monitoring your own performance because you're too interested in what they're saying. The self-consciousness has nowhere to go. It simply doesn't fit in the space curiosity occupies. This is not a social strategy. It's a neurological reality. Genuine curiosity activates the brain's learning networks. Learning networks and threat detection networks do not run simultaneously at full capacity. When you're truly interested in someone, you are physically less anxious about them. The practical version of this is simple. Ask questions you actually want to know the answers to. Not questions designed to seem thoughtful. Not questions from a list of conversation starters. Questions that emerge from genuine interest in the specific person in front of you. What do they actually do, beyond the job title? How did they end up there? What's the part of their work nobody usually asks about? What are they thinking about lately? What changed their mind about something recently? These questions work not because they're clever, but because they're real, and people feel the difference immediately. Being genuinely asked about your experience feels different from being politely questioned. One makes you feel seen. The other makes you feel processed. There is also the spotlight effect, which is worth understanding clearly because it is almost certainly making your social anxiety worse than it needs to be. The spotlight effect is the consistent human tendency to overestimate how much other people are paying attention to you. In social situations, you are the protagonist of your own experience, and you assume you're roughly as central to everyone else's experience as you are to yours. You're not. The other people in the room are the protagonists of their own experiences. They are thinking about how they're coming across, what they should say next, whether anyone noticed what they just said, whether they look okay, whether the person they're talking to likes them. They are, in other words, entirely preoccupied with themselves. The awkward comment you made that you've been replaying for 3 days? The other person has almost certainly forgotten it. Not because they're not paying attention, because they were paying attention to themselves. The silence that felt like rejection was most likely them thinking about what they wanted to say next. This is not cynicism about human nature. It's an accurate description of how attention works. We are each the center of our own experience, which means you are far less observed than you feel. And that means the stakes of any given social moment are far lower than your nervous system insists they are. There's one more piece worth naming: anchor phrases. These are short, genuine responses you can use when your mind goes temporarily blank, which it will, especially early on, especially when your nervous system is still learning to settle in challenging social situations. Tell me more about that. 4 words that buy you time, show genuine interest, and never fail to move a conversation forward. How did you end up doing that? A question that works in almost any professional or personal context, and almost always produces an interesting answer. What's that been like for you? This one invites people to move from the factual level to the experiential level, and most people respond with genuine warmth. These aren't tricks. They're bridges. They keep the conversation moving while your nervous system does what it needs to do: settle, recalibrate, bring your actual thinking back online. Social confidence is not the absence of awkward moments. Every socially confident person you've ever admired has had conversations that didn't land, jokes that missed, silences that stretched. The difference is they don't treat these moments as verdicts. An awkward silence is a brief, neutral event. It becomes data about your worth only if you decide it is. Most of the time, the other person was just thinking. Chapter 9. The fraud who keeps getting promoted. The more you achieve, the louder the voice that says you're about to be found out. Which is a strange reward system when you think about it. You worked for the thing. You got the thing. And now, instead of feeling the confidence you assumed would arrive with it, you feel a specific and persistent dread that someone somewhere is going to look more carefully and realize the whole thing was a mistake, that your promotion was a clerical error, that your success was mostly timing, that the people who believe in you are operating on incomplete information, and the day they get the full picture is only a matter of time. Welcome to imposter syndrome. It affects roughly 70% of people at some point in their lives. It is particularly common among the intelligent, the conscientious, and the high-achieving. The people who, by any external measure, have the least reason to doubt their competence are frequently the ones most convinced of their own fraudulence. This is not a coincidence. It is a feature of how the syndrome operates. Here's the mechanism. Your brain processes success and failure through different systems. Failure is easy. When something goes wrong, your brain has a ready explanation that fits neatly into existing self-doubt patterns. You weren't good enough. You didn't try hard enough. This confirms what you already suspected. Painful, yes, but internally consistent. The narrative holds. Success is harder. When something goes right, especially when it goes significantly right, beyond what you expected, beyond what the doubt pattern predicted, your brain faces a conflict. The success contradicts the established narrative, and brains, deeply uncomfortable with narrative contradiction, do not respond by updating the narrative. They respond by explaining away the contradiction. External attribution is the tool. It was luck. The timing was right. The competition was weak. The people evaluating you were easily impressed. You got away with something. The success gets filed under circumstances rather than capability, and the narrative about your fundamental inadequacy remains intact. No update required. The system maintains its internal consistency at the cost of your ability to accurately understand your own competence. This is what makes imposter syndrome so specifically cruel. It doesn't attack you when you're failing. It attacks you when you're succeeding. It takes your evidence and reclassifies it. Every achievement becomes proof, not of capability, but of luck. Every recognition becomes confirmation, not of worth, but of deception successfully maintained. The better you do, the more elaborate the fraud narrative has to become to account for it. I got asked to speak at a conference in my field a few years ago. My first thought was not gratitude. It was, they must not know who else they could have asked. I said yes anyway. The talk went well. My second thought afterward was, they were a generous audience. It took me an embarrassingly long time to consider the simpler explanation, that I actually had something worth saying. Imposter syndrome manifests in 5 recognizable patterns, and most people identify strongly with at least one. The perfectionist sets standards that guarantee a sense of failure regardless of outcome. Because perfection is not achievable, there is always a gap between what happened and what should have happened, and that gap becomes evidence of inadequacy rather than evidence of ambition. Finishing something good enough is not permitted, which means finishing at all feels like settling for inadequacy. The expert believes that genuine competence means knowing everything. Any gap in knowledge, any question they can't answer, any situation where they need to learn something new, feels like exposure rather than normal professional development. They avoid situations where their gaps might show. They over-prepare to compensate. They feel like frauds every time they encounter something they don't already know. The soloist believes that needing help is evidence of inadequacy. Collaboration feels like admitting weakness. Asking questions feels like revealing incompetence. They work harder, alone, to avoid the vulnerability of letting anyone see them struggle. The result is both exhaustion and isolation, which compounds the sense that they are somehow less than others. The natural genius expects mastery to arrive quickly and easily. When a new skill takes real effort, when understanding something requires multiple attempts, they interpret the struggle as evidence that they simply don't have what it takes. People who are truly capable, they believe, pick things up immediately. Effort means inadequacy. The superhuman believes they must excel in every domain simultaneously. Career, relationships, health, creativity, social life, all must be maintained at a high level at all times. Falling short in any single area becomes evidence of overall failure. They stretch themselves across everything and feel like they're doing nothing well. Each pattern is a different architecture around the same core belief. I am not as capable as people think I am, and eventually they will know it. The antidote is not confidence, not in the sense of feeling certain about your abilities. The antidote is accuracy. Start with evidence-based self-assessment, not feelings, which are unreliable and heavily influenced by the fraud narrative. Actual evidence. What have you built, solved, created, contributed? What problems have you handled that weren't handled before you arrived? What do you know now that you didn't know 3 years ago? What have people specifically said about your work? Not the generic positive feedback you've discounted, but the specific observations about the specific value you created. Write it down, not in your head, where the imposter narrative will immediately begin reframing it. On paper, where it has to remain visible. You are building a factual record that exists independently of how you feel about yourself on any given day. When the fraud voice starts constructing its case, you have a counterfile, evidence gathered by someone, you, who was actually present for all of it. The second move is understanding that nobody fully knows what they're doing. This is not a platitude. It is an accurate description of professional life at every level. The people who appear most confident and most competent in their roles are, in almost every case, figuring significant portions of it out as they go. They're making decisions with incomplete information, adapting to situations they haven't encountered before, learning from outcomes they didn't entirely predict. The difference between them and someone experiencing imposter syndrome is not that they have everything figured out. It's that they don't interpret the not knowing as evidence of fraud. Competence is not omniscience. It is the capacity to learn, adapt, problem solve, and recover. You almost certainly have this capacity. The evidence is in the record you've been discounting. The third move is learning to receive acknowledgement without immediately dismantling it. When someone compliments your work, the imposter response is to find the explanation that makes the compliment not really about you. They're being kind. They haven't seen the parts that didn't work. They don't have enough context. This is so automatic it feels like modesty. It isn't. It's the fraud narrative protecting itself from contradiction. Practice a different response. When someone acknowledges something you've done well, receive it. Not with arrogant agreement, with simple, genuine acceptance. Thank you. I worked hard on that. Or just thank you. Full stop. No deflection, no qualification, no immediate minimization. This feels uncomfortable because the imposter narrative has trained you to treat praise as dangerous. If you accept it, you might start believing it. And if you believe it, you might relax your vigilance. And if you relax your vigilance, you might stop compensating. And if you stop compensating, the fraud will be exposed. Follow that logic to its end, and you see what it actually is. A trap. A system that uses the fear of exposure to prevent you from ever accepting evidence that there is nothing to expose. Accept the compliment. Let it register. The sky will not fall. The final reframe is the most important one. Feeling uncertain is not evidence of inadequacy. It is evidence of engagement with something real and difficult. Certainty is easy when the stakes are low and the task is familiar. When you're doing something that genuinely matters, something at the edge of your current capability, something where the outcome is not guaranteed, uncertainty is the appropriate response. It means you're paying attention. It means you understand the stakes. It means you're not sleepwalking through something difficult. The most capable people in any field are often the most aware of complexity, the most uncertain about easy answers, the most conscious of what they don't yet know. This awareness is not weakness. It is a mark of genuine expertise. The people who are most certain are often the ones who haven't looked closely enough to see the gaps. Your uncertainty is not a confession. It is a credential. You are not a fraud. You are someone paying close enough attention to feel the weight of what you're doing. That weight means it matters. That it matters means you're doing something real. Chapter 10. Anti-fragile. Fragile confidence needs everything to go well. That's not confidence. That's luck in a nice outfit. You've met people who seem genuinely confident until something goes wrong. Then the whole thing collapses surprisingly fast. The self-belief that looked solid turns out to have been contingent on a specific set of favorable conditions. Remove the favorable conditions, and what's underneath is not confidence at all. It's a performance that required good reviews to keep running. This is the most common form of confidence people try to build. Confidence based on things going well. Confidence that accumulates during successes and depletes during failures. Confidence that needs to be protected from too much challenge because too much challenge might reveal that it was never as solid as it looked. It is, in the precise technical sense, fragile. It functions well when conditions are stable and breaks under stress. There is another kind. Not resilient. Resilient just means it survives difficulty and returns to its previous state. Something more useful than that. Confidence that actually becomes stronger under pressure. That uses adversity as material rather than treating it as threat. That comes out of difficulty, not depleted but expanded. This is anti-fragile confidence, and building it requires a fundamental shift in what you believe setbacks are for. The shift is not about positive thinking. It is not about telling yourself that everything happens for a reason or that failure is just feedback. Those framings are fine as far as they go, but they stay at the surface. The deeper shift is structural. It's about changing what a setback actually means in your internal accounting system. In the fragile model, a setback is a withdrawal from your confidence account. It reduces the balance. Enough setbacks, and the account is empty. This is why people with fragile confidence avoid difficulty. They're protecting a balance they know is finite. In the anti-fragile model, a setback is raw material. It goes in as difficulty and comes out as capability, if you process it correctly. The account doesn't just survive the withdrawal, it grows because of it. Not despite the difficulty, because of it. Your muscles understand this completely. You lift something heavy. The muscle fibers sustain microscopic damage. Your body responds by rebuilding those fibers slightly stronger than they were before. Repeat this process consistently, and the capacity that seemed like a ceiling becomes a floor. Anti-fragile confidence is built the same way. You attempt something at the edge of your capability. It doesn't go as planned. you process it correctly. You come out with something you didn't have before. Not just information about what went wrong, but actual expanded capacity to handle difficulty. The setback made you more capable of handling the next setback, and the one after that. The key phrase there is process it correctly, because the same difficult experience, processed poorly, produces the fragile response. Processed well, it produces the anti-fragile one. The experience itself is neutral. The processing is everything. The framework for processing setbacks well has 5 components. They need to be done in order, and the first one is the one most people skip: rapid emotional processing. When something goes wrong, feel it. Fully, briefly, consciously. Set a specific time limit, 10 minutes, 15, and within that window, don't manage, suppress, or reframe. Feel the disappointment, the frustration, the embarrassment, the fear about what it means. These emotions are real, and they have energy that needs somewhere to go. If you don't give them a designated window, they go underground and keep running in the background, influencing your decisions, shaping your risk tolerance, quietly arguing for retreat without ever announcing themselves directly. The time limit is not optional. You're not suppressing emotion. You're containing it. You're saying, "This matters, I'm going to give it its due, and then I'm going to move through it." The container keeps the emotion from expanding to fill all available space, which is what happens when you try to skip it entirely. I had a project fail publicly once. Not catastrophically, but publicly, which felt worse. My first instinct was to move on immediately. Analyze, learn, improve, show everyone, including myself, that I was fine. I was not fine. I skipped the first step and paid for it for months in a persistent, low-grade reluctance to try anything similar. The avoidance was subtle enough that I almost didn't notice it. But it was there, quietly running, a direct result of emotions I'd refused to feel. Perspective expansion. After the emotional window closes, step back. Ask yourself how this will matter in a year, in 5 years. Not to minimize it, to size it accurately. Most setbacks that feel enormous in the immediate aftermath are medium-sized at 12 months and small at 5 years. Knowing this doesn't make the immediate feeling less real, but it prevents you from making permanent decisions based on temporary conditions. Also ask, what would I tell someone I cared about if this happened to them? This question is reliable because it accesses your actual wisdom rather than your defensive reactions. You know how to put things in perspective for other people. You've been doing it for years. Apply the same intelligence to yourself. Learning extraction. Mine the experience for what it actually contains. Not the easy lesson, I should have prepared more, but the nuanced one. What did this reveal about your assumptions? What did you discover about your own responses under pressure? What did you learn about the situation, the people involved, the approach you took? What would you do differently? And what, honestly, would you do the same? The goal is not to extract a lesson that makes the setback feel worthwhile. The goal is to leave the experience having genuinely learned something, even if what you learned is simply that you can survive this kind of difficulty without being destroyed by it. Identity reinforcement. This is where anti-fragile confidence diverges most clearly from its fragile counterpart. Instead of asking, "What does this failure say about me?" ask, "What does attempting this say about me?" You tried something difficult. That says something. You took a risk without guaranteed return. That says something. You put yourself in a position where failure was possible because success mattered enough to pursue. That says something significant. The fact that this particular attempt didn't produce the outcome you wanted is one data point. The fact that you attempted it is a different data point. The doubt pattern will try to make the first one the headline. Your job is to keep the second one visible. You are not someone who failed. You are someone who tries. These are not the same thing. One is an event. The other is an identity. And identity is what drives the next set of choices. Strategic adaptation. Take what you learned and use it to modify your approach, not your ambition. There is a crucial difference between changing your strategy based on genuine insight and abandoning your direction based on fear of repeating a painful experience. The first is intelligent adaptation. The second is the setback winning in slow motion. Ask what you're changing and why. If the answer is because I learned something real, proceed. If the answer is because this was uncomfortable and I'd like to avoid discomfort, that's the fear talking. Listen to it, thank it, and then make the decision you'd make if it weren't there. There is a quality that anti-fragile confidence eventually produces that is genuinely different from anything fragile confidence can offer. Researchers call it challenge appraisal, the automatic tendency to read difficult situations as opportunities rather than threats. This is not an attitude you decide to have. It's a response pattern that develops after you've experienced enough times that difficult things make you more capable. Once you have actual evidence, not hope, not faith, but evidence from your own history, that you come out of hard things stronger, your nervous system stops treating difficulty as a signal to retreat. It starts treating it as a signal to engage. This changes everything about how you move through your life. You become genuinely less afraid of things going wrong. Not because you don't care about outcomes, because you trust your ability to work with whatever the outcome is. Because you've proven to yourself repeatedly that you are not broken by difficulty. You are, in fact, built by it. Chapter 11. The Advanced Work. You've been carrying a version of a story that isn't entirely accurate. Not because you lied, but because memory is reconstruction, not recording. Every time you remember something, your brain doesn't retrieve a stored file. It rebuilds the experience from available materials. Current emotional state, current beliefs, what you've thought about the event since it happened. The reconstruction feels like the original. It isn't. It's a new version, assembled in the present, wearing the past's clothing. This means something important. The memories that still undermine your confidence, the ones that produce a specific quality of shame or inadequacy when they surface, are not fixed historical documents. They are reconstructions that your brain has been building and rebuilding, each time slightly shaped by the beliefs you hold in the present. They feel like the truth about what happened. They are, in part, a reflection of who you believe yourself to be right now. And because they're reconstructions, they can be reconstructed differently. This is not revisionist history. You're not pretending the difficult thing didn't happen, or that it didn't hurt, or that it had no real consequences. You're changing the meaning the experience carries, the emotional charge it still produces, the way it shapes how you see yourself in the present. The neuroscience behind this is called memory reconsolidation. It's one of the most significant findings in recent memory research. Every time a memory is recalled, it briefly returns to a malleable state, open to being updated, modified, or rewritten, before being stored again. The window is short, a matter of minutes. But during that window, the memory is genuinely plastic. What you do in that window shapes how the memory is stored next time. Most people spend that window doing the same thing they always do, re-experiencing the original negative emotion, reconfirming the original limiting interpretation, then storing it again, slightly more entrenched than before. You can do something different. The Memory Reconsolidation Protocol. Begin by identifying one specific memory that still produces self-doubt when it surfaces. A moment of failure, embarrassment, rejection, or criticism that hasn't fully lost its charge. Choose something that feels genuinely uncomfortable but not your most traumatic experience. Something you can work with consciously, without being overwhelmed. Before you touch the memory, establish confident physiology. Stand tall. Breathe slowly. Exhale longer than inhale. Slight lift at the corners of your mouth. Hold this for 30 seconds until the physical state feels settled. You need to be in a resourceful state before you bring the memory up. Not because the memory needs to feel comfortable, but because your current emotional state influences how the reconstruction happens. Now bring the memory to mind. Hold it clearly. Let it be what it is. Don't minimize it. Don't rush to reframe it. Just hold it while maintaining the confident physical state. This is the neurological conflict that opens the window. Your body is signaling safety, while your brain is processing something that previously meant threat. The contradiction makes the memory briefly malleable. While holding both the memory and the physical state, ask yourself 3 questions. What did this experience reveal about my resilience? What did I actually learn? Not the surface lesson, but the real one. And what did surviving this make possible that wouldn't have been possible otherwise? You're not looking for silver linings. You're looking for what's genuinely there. Almost every difficult experience contains something real. A capacity discovered, a clarity earned, an understanding that came at cost. Find the thing that's actually there. I have a specific memory from my mid-20s of being publicly corrected on something I was confident about, in front of people whose opinion mattered to me. For years afterward, that memory produced a particular quality of contracted self-consciousness in any situation that resembled it. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand that what I'd actually demonstrated in that moment was the capacity to be wrong in front of people and keep going. I'd treated it as evidence of inadequacy. It was evidence of something considerably more useful. Now create a new narrative, not a more comfortable version of events, an accurate one. The original narrative your brain stored was shaped by the emotional intensity of the moment, the limited perspective available to someone experiencing it, and the self-doubt patterns that were already present at the time. It was always an interpretation. You're replacing it with a better one. I took a risk. It didn't go the way I'd hoped. I learned something specific. I kept going. That's the accurate version for most difficult memories. Not heroic, not minimizing, just accurate. Hold this new narrative while maintaining the confident physical state. Then do one final thing. Bring your younger self, the version of you in that memory, into view. See them clearly, and send them something they needed but probably didn't receive in the moment. Appreciation. Not pity, not rescue. Appreciation for the fact that they tried, that they were there, that they survived it and continued forward. This step works because it changes the relationship you have with your own past. Most people relate to the versions of themselves who struggled with some combination of disappointment, embarrassment, or impatience. This keeps those past experiences active as sources of self-doubt. When you relate to them with genuine appreciation, the emotional charge associated with the memory begins to shift. The experience stops being something you carry as evidence against yourself and starts becoming something you draw from as evidence of who you are. Future memory installation. The second advanced technique runs in the opposite direction. Instead of reconsolidating the past, you're preloading the future. Choose a specific upcoming situation that triggers anticipatory self-doubt. A presentation, a difficult conversation, a creative submission, a new challenge. Then build a detailed mental movie of it going well. Not perfectly. Well, you, handling the situation with calm competence, dealing with whatever unexpected elements arise with flexibility and intelligence, finishing and feeling the specific quality of satisfaction that comes from having done something that required real effort. Make the movie sensory. See what you'd see. Hear the specific sounds of that environment. Feel the physical sensations of moving through the situation confidently. The breath, the posture, the quality of attention you bring. Generate genuine emotion during the rehearsal, not performed positivity. The real feeling of capability, earned through preparation and real skill. Run this visualization daily until the event occurs. Each repetition lays down neural architecture. Your brain stores these imagined experiences as functional memories, not identical to real experience, but neurologically meaningful. When the actual situation arrives, your brain will have a pre-existing pathway for handling it confidently. It won't be encountering the situation cold. It will be running a pattern it has already practiced. The presentation you've visualized 20 times is not the same neurological event as the one you haven't thought about until you're walking in the door. Confidence anchoring. The third technique creates an on-demand access point to your most resourceful states. It uses the same associative learning mechanism that links smells to memories and songs to emotions, but deliberately, with a specific physical anchor you can deploy when you need it. Identify a moment when you felt genuinely, specifically confident, not abstractly positive, specifically capable and at ease. A moment with texture and detail. Hold it in your memory and let the feeling build. See what you saw, hear what you heard, feel what you felt. Let the emotional state reach its peak. At the peak, create a physical anchor. Touch your thumb and index finger together, or press your hand flat against your sternum, or make a specific, quiet fist. Hold the gesture for several seconds while the feeling is strongest. Then release both the gesture and the memory. Repeat this process with several different confident memories, always using the same physical gesture. You're building a neurological association between the gesture and the emotional state. The same mechanism that makes your mouth water when you smell food you've enjoyed. Eventually, the gesture begins to trigger the state, not through magic, through conditioning. Test it in low-stakes situations first. Use the anchor before a conversation you feel good about and notice whether the confident state arrives. Then use it before something more challenging. The anchor gets stronger with use and more reliable with time. Taken together, these three techniques, memory reconsolidation, future installation, and anchoring, work at a different depth than the foundational tools. They restructure your relationship with your past, pre-build your relationship with your future, and give you direct access to your most capable states in the present. They require more precision and more patience than the basics. They also produce changes that are harder to undo. You are not managing self-doubt with these tools. You are rebuilding the foundation it sits on. The work is slower here. It is also more permanent. Do it anyway, slowly, if necessary. The slowness is not a problem. The foundation is the point. Chapter 12. It spreads. The most useful thing about genuine confidence is that you can't fake it. The second most useful thing is that you can't hide it either. There is a version of confidence that's performed. The loud entry, the firm handshake, the rehearsed certainty about things that don't quite warrant certainty. Most people can feel it immediately. Something is slightly off. The volume is too high. The ease seems to require too much effort. You leave the interaction feeling vaguely managed rather than genuinely met. Then there's the other kind. The person who doesn't need the room to notice them because they're not monitoring whether the room is noticing them, who listens without preparing their response, who disagrees without hostility because they don't need to win, who takes up the appropriate amount of space, not more, not less, because they're not compensating for anything. You feel that kind too, immediately, differently. The difference is not charisma. It's not skill or experience or any particular set of qualities. It's the absence of a specific underlying noise. The noise of someone continuously managing how they're perceived. When that noise is gone, what's left is presence. And presence, it turns out, is what people have been responding to all along. Your nervous system communicates constantly, below the level of words. Heart rate variability, micro-expressions, postural tension, the subtle timing of eye contact, the quality of attention you bring to a conversation. These signals are received by other people's nervous systems before their conscious minds have processed anything. You have been reading these signals in others your entire life, usually without knowing you were doing it. Other people are reading them in you. When you're operating in self-doubt mode, your nervous system is running a threat assessment, scanning for judgment, monitoring reactions, preparing defenses. This produces a specific quality of tension that other people's nervous systems pick up on and respond to, usually with a corresponding increase in their own vigilance, not consciously, automatically. One nervous system in threat mode quietly activates the threat detection systems in the nervous systems around it. When you're operating from genuine confidence, not performed confidence, but the kind that comes from actually having worked through the patterns, your nervous system signals safety. And safety is, neurologically, one of the most valuable things one person can offer another. People relax in your presence. They stop choosing their words so carefully. They become more willing to say what they actually think, admit what they don't know, take small risks in the conversation that they wouldn't take with someone whose reactions they're managing. The quality of the interaction changes. It becomes real rather than performed on both sides. This is the contagion, not something you transmit deliberately, something that spreads because you stopped blocking it. The effect is particularly visible in professional environments, which tend to run on a specific form of collective performance anxiety. Most workplaces contain a significant amount of undisclosed uncertainty. People who don't fully understand what's being asked of them, who have concerns they haven't voiced, who disagree with decisions they've nodded along to. This undisclosed uncertainty doesn't disappear. It goes into the work, into the culture, into the quality of the decisions being made. When one person consistently shows up without the performance layer, asks the question that everyone was thinking but nobody wanted to ask, admits uncertainty without treating it as a confession, disagrees respectfully without requiring validation afterward, something shifts in the room. Other people notice, not always consciously, but they notice that it was safe to do that nothing terrible happened, that the person was received rather than punished, and then, gradually, some of them start doing it too. I watched this happen once in a team I was part of for about 2 years. The team had a culture of confident presentation. Everyone came to meetings with positions already formed, delivered them with certainty, defended them when challenged. The quality of the actual thinking was uneven, but the quality of the performance was consistent. Then someone new joined who didn't perform. She said, "I'm not sure when she wasn't sure." She said, "I disagree with that. Here's why," without the accompanying layer of defensiveness. She asked the questions that made the room slightly uncomfortable because they were questions nobody had thought to ask. Within about 3 months, the meetings were different. Not because of anything she said explicitly about how they should run, just because she demonstrated, repeatedly, that a different way of showing up was possible and survivable. The contagion moves through relationships differently than it moves through professional environments. In close relationships, the shift is less about what you model and more about what you stop demanding. People who operate from self-doubt and external validation tend to require something from the people close to them. Reassurance, affirmation, careful management of the relationship to avoid triggering their insecurities. This requirement is usually implicit. It's never announced, rarely even recognized. But the people in the relationship can feel it. It creates a low-level background tension, a sense of emotional work that runs continuously underneath the surface. When you stop requiring external validation, this tension lifts. The people close to you can relax in a way they couldn't before. They can be honest with you because they're not managing your reaction to honesty. They can share their own struggles without worrying about whether it will be too much. They can be imperfect, uncertain, vulnerable, because you've stopped needing them to be otherwise. The relationship becomes, in the specific technical sense, safer. Not because anything dramatic changed, because one person stopped making it expensive. This is what genuine confidence contributes to the people around you. Not inspiration, not leadership, not the example of someone who has figured everything out. Just the relief of someone who doesn't need managing. Someone who can be present without being fragile about it. There is a dimension to this that extends further than most people expect. When children grow up around adults who are genuinely confident, not performing confidence, but actually at ease in their own skin, they internalize different assumptions about what normal looks like. Children learn less from what they're told than from what they observe. When they see an adult handle mistakes without collapsing, pursue something uncertain without needing guarantees, receive criticism without becoming defensive or despairing, they're not just watching behavior. They're updating their model of what people do, what's possible, what's normal. The self-doubt patterns you're working to change were, in part, learned from observation. Someone in your early environment demonstrated that this was how you responded to uncertainty, to failure, to judgment. You watched it enough times that it became your template. You are now, for someone younger than you, that person, whether or not you have children. There are young people in your life, nieces, nephews, students, teammates, neighbors, who are updating their models of what adults do. What they see in you goes into that model. This is not pressure. It's simply accurate. The ripple effects of genuine confidence are largely invisible to the person producing them. You can't trace the moment someone spoke up in a meeting because they'd watched you speak up first. You can't measure the conversation a teenager had with themselves after watching you handle something difficult with grace. You can't count the decisions made differently because someone felt safer around you. This invisibility is fine. The effects are real regardless of whether you can see them. What you are building, slowly, imperfectly, through repetition and setbacks and continued practice, is not just a different relationship with your own self-doubt. It is a different quality of presence in every room you enter, every conversation you have, every person who, at some level, receives the signal your nervous system is now sending. The signal is simple. It says, "I'm here. I'm okay. You can be too." Most people are hungry for that signal, more than they know how to say. Send it anyway, repeatedly, without announcement. It spreads. Chapter 13. The Comparison Machine. You've compared your unedited life to someone else's highlight reel and concluded you were losing. That's not a fair fight. That's not even a fight. It's a setup. A specific, engineered, highly optimized setup, designed by people who understood exactly what comparison does to the human nervous system and built an entire industry around it. Social media did not invent the comparison impulse. That impulse is ancient, baked into the same social hardware that made your nervous system treat networking events like survival tests. In small tribal environments, social comparison served a real purpose. It helped you assess your standing in the group, identify where you needed to improve, calibrate your behavior to maintain belonging. Comparison, used this way, was information. What it was not designed to handle was continuous, curated, algorithmically amplified exposure to the edited versions of millions of lives simultaneously. Your comparison hardware was built for a village. You're running it in a stadium. The inputs are not comparable. The outputs are predictable. You scroll. You see? Your brain runs its ancient assessment protocol. Where do I stand relative to this person? And reaches a conclusion based on the available data. The available data is a photograph taken at the best angle, in the best light, after several attempts, selected from a larger set of photographs, filtered, captioned with care, posted at the optimal time for engagement. The conclusion your brain reaches from this data feels like genuine social information. It is a heavily processed consumer product. Here's what's actually true about the people producing the most polished content. The relationship between the quality of someone's curated presentation and the quality of their internal life is, at best, weakly correlated. At worst, it runs in the opposite direction. The need to project success, happiness, and fulfillment publicly tends to increase as the private experience of those things decreases. Not always, but often enough that the pattern is worth knowing. The relentlessness of a perfect feed is frequently the external face of an internal emptiness that the performance is trying to fill. This is not cynicism about the people posting. It's an accurate description of how external validation seeking works at scale. When your self-worth depends on external confirmation, you post for responses. When the responses aren't enough, and they're never enough. For the same reason one drink isn't enough when you're actually thirsty, you post again, more carefully, more strategically. The feed becomes more curated as the internal need becomes more acute. You are not comparing yourself to someone's life. You are comparing yourself to someone's coping mechanism. The psychological term for what happens in the comparison loop is social comparison theory. Specifically, its downward and upward variance. Downward comparison, measuring yourself against someone who appears to be doing worse, produces a brief, shallow boost in self-esteem that dissipates quickly and leaves a faint residue of guilt. Upward comparison, measuring yourself against someone who appears to be doing better, produces a motivational response in some contexts and a deflating one in others. The deflating version is what most people experience on social media most of the time, because the platform is specifically designed to surface aspirational content. People and lives that trigger the upward comparison response. The algorithm is not neutral. It is optimized for engagement. And engagement, the research consistently shows, is higher when content produces an emotional response. Envy is an emotional response. Inadequacy is an emotional response. The platform surfaces what keeps you scrolling. What keeps you scrolling is often what makes you feel slightly worse about yourself. This is not a conspiracy. It's an optimization function operating exactly as intended. The problem is that you are inside the optimization function, and your self-worth is part of what's being optimized. I deleted social media from my phone for about 4 months a few years ago. Not dramatically. No announcement, no post about going offline. Just removed it quietly and waited to see what happened. What happened within about 2 weeks was a specific quality of mental quiet that I hadn't noticed was missing until it returned. The low hum of comparison had been so constant, I'd stopped hearing it as noise. I'd integrated it as normal. It wasn't normal. It was expensive. The first strategy for protecting your confidence in the comparison environment is developing what you might call editorial awareness. The practiced habit of reminding yourself, at the moment of comparison, exactly what you're comparing. You are comparing your complete internal experience, the uncertainty, the behind-the-scenes struggles, the full unedited texture of your daily life, to someone else's public performance. This is not like comparing apples to oranges. It's like comparing the experience of making a meal to a photograph of a finished dish. The comparison has no valid informational content. It cannot tell you anything real about the relative quality of two lives. It can only tell you about the relative quality of two presentations. When you feel the comparison impulse fire, and it will, because the hardware is old and the environment is designed to trigger it, pause for 3 seconds and name what's actually happening. I'm comparing my reality to their performance. That's it. The naming creates the gap. The gap creates the choice. The second strategy is curating your digital environment with the same seriousness you'd apply to any other environment that significantly affects your mental state. If there were people in your physical life who consistently left you feeling inadequate, vaguely inferior, subtly behind, you would limit your time with them. You would not invite them to come live in your bedroom and interact with you first thing every morning and last thing every night. Your phone is in your bedroom, first thing in the morning, last thing at night. The people in your feed are in there with you. Unfollow without ceremony. Mute without explanation. Your feed is not a social obligation. It is an environment you are choosing to spend time in. Choose it deliberately. This doesn't mean building an echo chamber or avoiding perspectives that challenge you. It means distinguishing between content that challenges your thinking, which has value, and content that simply challenges your self-worth, which doesn't. The third strategy is developing intentionality about when and how you use platforms. The most damaging mode of social media consumption is passive and reactive, scrolling without a purpose, in the gaps between other activities, when your resistance is low and your attention is diffuse. This mode puts you in a receptive state where the comparison inputs land without the buffer of conscious evaluation. Use platforms with a purpose. Open an app because you want to find a specific thing, a conversation, a piece of information, a genuine connection with a specific person. When you found it, close the app. This sounds simple because it is simple. It is also genuinely difficult if the habit has become automated, which for most people it has. The automation is the problem. Interrupting automation requires conscious replacement, a specific alternative behavior for the moments when the reflexive reach for the phone typically occurs. The fourth strategy moves from defense to construction. Develop what might be called an internal reference frame, a stable internal standard for evaluating your life that doesn't depend on external comparison. This means getting clear, with real specificity, about what a good life looks like to you. Not in the abstract, in concrete terms. What kind of work feels meaningful? What quality of relationships you want? What you want to be building, learning, contributing? What matters to you when you remove the question of what others think? Most people have never answered this question directly because the comparison machine answers it for them. The machine tells you what success looks like. It looks like what the most successful people in your feed have. The machine tells you what happiness looks like. It looks like what happy people post. Your own actual preferences, separate from the curated ideals you've been exposed to, require deliberate excavation. When you know what you actually want, not what you've been shown to want, but what genuinely matters to you when you're honest, comparison loses much of its grip. You're no longer measuring yourself against someone else's destination. You're measuring your progress against your own. This doesn't make you immune to comparison, but it changes the comparison's reference point from external to internal. And an internal reference point is one you actually control. There is a final note worth sitting with. The people you most admire, the ones whose work genuinely moves you, whose lives seem genuinely well-lived, are almost never the ones performing the most aggressively. They tend to be deeply engaged with the work itself, less concerned with its reception than with its quality. They tend to share selectively, from genuine desire to connect, rather than from need to be seen. The life worth having is usually being lived too fully to be documented in real time. You already know what it looks and feels like to be genuinely absorbed in something you care about. Present, engaged, not thinking about how it appears. That's the state the comparison machine takes you furthest from. Go back to it. Regularly. Without documenting the return, that's the whole strategy. You don't become confident. You stop performing the doubt. Everything in this book has been pointing toward one thing. Not a technique, not a mindset, not a set of daily practices you're supposed to maintain until confidence arrives like a package you ordered. One recognition. The confident version of you was never somewhere else. It was always here, underneath the conditioning, underneath the learned responses, underneath the accumulated evidence your brain collected for years to make the doubt feel like truth. You were not born doubting yourself. That came later. It came in classrooms and living rooms and playgrounds, in moments that taught you it wasn't safe to be fully yourself, that worth was conditional, that the voice in your head needed to stay a few steps ahead of the critics outside it. The doubt was installed, which means it was never actually you. What you've been doing throughout this book is not self-improvement. It's excavation. You've been removing what was placed on top of something that was already there. The tools are real. The neural override protocol rewires actual neural pathways. The confidence spiral builds genuine momentum through real accumulated evidence. Memory reconsolidation changes how the past affects the present. These are not motivational devices. They are mechanisms. Use them consistently, and they produce measurable, lasting changes in how your brain defaults. But mechanisms require use. Knowledge without application is entertainment. You can understand everything in this book and change nothing if understanding is where it stops. So here is the only commitment that matters. Use one tool today, not all of them. 1. The next time self-doubt fires, and it will probably within the next few hours, thank your brain. Ask what your most confident self would do, change your posture, and run the mental rehearsal. 2 minutes. That's the whole ask. Then do it again tomorrow. What you're building is not a destination. Confidence is not a place you arrive at and then maintain from a position of safety. It's a practice, ongoing, requiring regular use like any other capability. There will be days when the old patterns resurge, days when the critic is loud and the doubt is persuasive and the technique feels like trying to bail out a boat with a teaspoon. Those days are not failures. They are the practice. The difference between where you started and where you're going is not that difficulty disappears. It's that you stop needing it to disappear before you act. You feel the uncertainty and move anyway. You feel the doubt and choose differently anyway. You feel the fear and show up anyway. Confidence is not the absence of those feelings. It is action in their presence, chosen deliberately, repeated until the choice becomes character. The world does not need more people performing certainty they don't feel. It has plenty of that. What it is genuinely short on is people who can be honest about uncertainty while remaining fully engaged with what they're building. People who can be wrong without collapsing. who can be uncertain without retreating, who can fail and return with something they learned rather than a wound they're protecting. That is what you're becoming. Not someone who never doubts, someone for whom doubt is no longer the final word. The voice is still there. It always will be, in some form. But it speaks now to someone who has heard it so many times, interrupted it so deliberately, redirected it so consistently, that it no longer sounds like truth. It sounds like what it always was, a program running in the background, losing power each time you choose otherwise, starting now, starting with whatever the next thing is. That's the whole practice. That's always been the whole practice.